There was an important moment for the EU today. The leaders of its 27 members held a video summit and they have agreed a coronavirus emergency fund. Well, let's talk to Ros Atkins, who's been monitoring this. Hi, Ros, what do you have?
Hi, Kasia. Good to see you. And, well, the EU is used to having its unity questioned, isn't it? This coronavirus outbreak's been absolutely no different. And today's summit was the latest test. The focus was an emergency fund that Emmanuel Macron has said, perhaps a little dramatically, was essential to the survival of the EU. Well, the fund is now in place and it's not come cheap. It's worth around $575 billion. That's 540 billion euros. It's hard to get a handle on the scale of these figures, really, isn't it? But this is more than the GDP of Poland, so it is substantial. And you might remember how a week or two back the EU said it owed Italy an apology for letting it down at the start of this crisis. Well, it seems it's saying sorry with an enormous cheque, and it's a cheque that's largely being covered by Northern European countries like Germany and France. Let's begin with Mark Leyen, who's in Rome.
In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed right here inside this building, establishing the European Economic Community, the forerunner of the European Union, by its 6 founding members, one of which was Italy. This country has always been proud of being at the heart of the European idea, and now many here feel let down by the project it helped to form.
The crisis in relations has played into the hands of the extreme right, some of its members making a public display of hostility, feeding anti-European sentiment now at its highest ever here. In the bookshops reopened this week, Italy's historical ties with Europe are on show. But as are its current battles too, with a disease that has shaken the roots of European cooperation.
I was pro-European and I have changed my mind. I don't believe in general anymore in the Union because I don't think there is solidarity.
We felt betrayed. I feel European, so I hope everything will change.
We need Europe and Europe needs us, and I believe that Italy will break if it will go out from Europe.
This country has fought many battles in its long history, but now one with its allies to help it emerge, recover, rise up again. Mark Leyen, BBC News, Rome.
Well, we also wanted to understand exactly how this EU emergency fund is going to be used. So we got in touch with the BBC's Gavin Lee, who's in Brussels.
This is huge, and it's split up into 3 areas. About 100 billion of that for workers, for employees to have loans so they don't lay them off straight away, and quick access to those loans, for businesses to try to kickstart the companies that might need it, and for government specifically, 240 billion available. Countries can borrow up to 2% of their GDP specifically to spend on health. So the Italian government, for example, could spend on care homes or to help hospital infrastructure. Then there's the bigger issue of how much more they'll need. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, said today that's probably going to be around €1 trillion. They're going to need a longer-term fund for this. The answer of what they come up with was pretty cryptic. They said it will be a mix of loans and grants. There are some countries in the north that are very opposed to loaning their money to the south. This will be decided after an analysis, the Commission said. So basically, roll on another few weeks. We're looking at another emergency summit.
Now, the EU is also trying to coordinate the easing of lockdown restrictions. It's now agreed some guidelines on this. Easing should only happen when deaths and infections have been reduced for a sustained period, healthcare systems are able to cope with a new surge of cases, and there must be enough testing capacity. All of which some might say is pretty close to common sense and raises the issue of why EU member states are not being more ambitious in how they work together. Indeed, some argue a lack of coordination has already cost lives. Now, I would strongly recommend a brilliant analysis on this from the BBC's Europe editor, Katja Adler. It's on the BBC News website. She says, yes, some scientists would argue better coordination would definitely have helped, but as Katja points out, this hasn't even been possible among states in the US, and it's going to be harder still among 27 independent countries. Well, today we've heard from Angela Merkel on Germany's easing of the lockdown this week. Here are some pictures from earlier of a secondary school near Düsseldorf. Now, let's be clear, this isn't a full reopening. It's just for students who are sitting exams. And as you can see, strict social distancing rules are in place. Later in May, many more schools will reopen. And today Angela Merkel talked about the need for Germany to be clever and cautious. Here's more of what she said.
Niemand hört es gerne.
No one likes to hear it, but it is the truth. We're not living in the final phase of the pandemic, but we're still at its beginning. We'll have to live with this virus for a long time.
I have several other important updates in Europe for you. On care homes, the World Health Organization's Dr. Hans Kluge says up to half of those who've died from COVID-19 were resident in long-term care facilities, and he's called this an unimaginable human tragedy. In Sweden, well, officials have recorded more than 2,000 deaths and are now saying 26% of people in Stockholm are expected to be infected by the start of May. Now, these are pictures from 3 days back in the capital. Sweden, remember, has not imposed strict lockdown measures. Instead, it's urging people to take responsibility. From Sweden to Bosnia-Herzegovina, a top court there says measures restricting freedom of movement for children and pensioners are unconstitutional. It's one of the few countries that has stopped children going outside. Another has been Spain, but from Sunday, for the first time in 6 weeks there, children under 14 will be allowed to go out for short walks near their homes. And Castro, as you know, there is much more on all of these stories I've been mentioning on the BBC website. The address is bbc.com/news.
Ros, excellent stuff. Thank you so much for updating us on the situation in Europe. Our thanks to Ros Atkins there. Now, China is giving the World Health Organization an additional $30 million a week after President Trump suspended US funds for the UN agency. Mr. Trump has accused the WHO of mishandling the pandemic and has repeatedly attacked Beijing for the outbreak. Well, Beijing has already revised its numbers of those it says have died in Wuhan. Now, researchers at the University of Hong Kong estimate that China had 4 times more COVID-19 cases than it first claimed. But China's ambassador to London has denied any cover-up.
The virus does not respect borders or discriminate between races. In face of the crisis, blaming and scapegoating are futile. Arrogance and insolence will only poison the cooperation between countries.
No reading between the lines there.